We welcome Minister Paschal Donoghue and we'll call Deputy Mary Lou MacDonald, please.
Minister, the crisis in child and adolescent mental health services has escalated to a full-blown emergency. On the watch of this government, waiting lists for first-time appointments have increased dramatically, while the number of young people waiting more than a year has nearly trebled. It's virtually impossible to access services. The reviews into CAMHS by the Mental Health Commission and the Maskey report were damning. The system is plagued not only by dangerous waiting times, but by alarming issues with clinical governance, high staff turnover and recruitment problems, and the absence of an out-of-hours emergency service. Vulnerable, at-risk children and young people are locked out of the urgent mental health care that they so desperately need. They spend years crying out for help and knocking on the door of a system that is broken. It's a wilderness for children and young people suffering with severe depression, anxiety and suicide ideation. Even when young people get inside the system, they face alarming levels of dysfunction. Children are prescribed powerful antipsychotic medications with very little intervention. Often vital follow-up care disappears and children get lost in the system. Children with disabilities in need of a dual diagnosis and mental health care are sent from pillar to post and they fall through the cracks. Those who turn 18 are cut off and directed to the adult system. Last night, Chocty, David Cullinan, Mark Ward and I met with Families for Reform of CAMHS, and their experiences are heartbreaking. One distraught mother told me about her 10-year-old daughter, Maggie. She had already endured cancer. She now suffers from depression, anxiety and self-injurious behaviour. Maggie was on the urgent list for a year before she received a CAMHS meeting. She received an assessment for an intellectual disability, but she wasn't accepted into service because there's no specialist in the area. Maggie is in a full-blown mental health crisis. She receives no care, she's in distress, and she doesn't leave the house apart from going to school. Another mother told me about her teenage daughter who suffers from severe anxiety, depression and constant panic attacks. She wouldn't leave the house and withdrew from her friends. She deteriorated by the day, and when referred to CAMHS, she was told she'd have to wait a minimum of 6 months. It then took a further 2 months to get a reply from her first meeting and another 3 months for a follow-up appointment. This mother had to chase and chase to get care for her daughter. After 15 months of an ordeal, there has been some improvement, but this young woman has missed almost a year of school. These children aren't alone, Minister. Their stories are replicated in their thousands, and children deserve better. Minister, tá níos fear tiltte ag próistí, ní cór go mbeadh orthu fanacht cráite agus trína chéile le haig seirbhísí meabhart láinte, ní mór den rialtas gníomhú anois loireach. Sinn Féin's bill before the Dáil this evening calls for change. As a first step, it gives the Mental Health Commission the statutory power to regulate CAMHS. This would empower the Commission to implement its 49 recommendations for improvement, to tackle waiting lists, to end the scandal of children being inappropriately admitted to adult acute psychiatric wards. Minister, will you support the Sinn Féin bill tonight? Will government vote in favour of the Sinn Féin bill tonight?
Thank you very much, Count Corla, and thank you, Deputy, for raising what the government accept to be a very, very important issue. The Deputy in her question to me made reference to Maggie, made reference to other families who have approached Deputy MacDonald, but have also approached deputies on all sides of the House and through our constituency work. Of course, we're all deeply familiar with challenges that are there for families, for carers, looking after young ones, young children, teenagers, young adults who are experiencing mental health difficulties and at times many other vulnerabilities and needs within their lives. The government will continue to act to make available the resource to make a difference to those who need additional support, who need additional help within their lives. It's the reason why, for example, in community CAMHS teams, we've now seen an increase to 820 fully funded posts. These are jobs that are funded by the government across the length and breadth of our country to respond back to the Maggie, to respond back to all other young men and women who need the help that we as a government, that we as an Oireachtas want to give them. If I look at how that figure stands, that is an increase in 68 roles versus where we were last year, and that will be further added to by an additional €10 million that was announced by Minister Butler, that will look at how we will provide additional roles and additional posts across our country where we accept they are so seriously needed. In terms of the budget that is available to respond back to these many important needs, for the CAMHS element alone of our health services, this now stands at €146.5 million. And in addition to this, a further €110 million is being provided to community-based organisations to help them respond back to the needs that we know are there, and to add to the services that are directly provided for and directly funded by the state. But what the Deputy covered off in her very important question is all the issues that we know continue to be there. I know, as I talk about these figures, even with my acknowledgement of Maggie and of all of the other lives that deputies on this side of the House encounter too, we all know the many stories that are there of needs that need to be better met, the many stories that are there of young lives that need additional support. But this is why, for example, the government has now ensured that for the first time in the history of the state, we will have a national office for young mental health within the HSE. It is why Minister Donnelly, Minister Butler have ensured that we now have a national clinical lead within the HSE and an Assistant National Director for Children and Youth Mental Health, put those roles in place to ensure this additional funding, these additional roles, translate into the additional services that the government wants to see provided. And in terms of the additional further measures that were provided in the budget this year to make a difference to those who we need further help, it is why we're going to be expanding multidisciplinary teams led by CAMHS with all of the different health professionals within them to respond back to the lives that we want to further help. And it is why there will be, on a trial and pilot basis made available, a development of a central referral mechanism to better ensure that the resources, the money, the jobs, the posts that we're making available go to those who need them the most. In relation to the specific question that Deputy MacDonald ended on, we will be putting forward this evening a timed amendment in relation to this, and the specific reason why is the government will be bringing forward for, we hope, the summer legislative session, a further mental health bill which will have 35 different sections within it, all focused on the regulation of mental health services. And we believe this bill, which will be brought forward shortly, will provide a different and more effective way of responding back to the regulation needs we acknowledge are there.
Deputy MacDonald.
So, with respect, Minister, that's all just rhetoric. See, the problem is you're not responding to Maggie. She's 10 years old. She is receiving no services. She is in a full-blown crisis, and her mother is desperate. That's Maggie's story. And your assertions here don't change that fact at all. So what is the response from Maggie? A minister to take to his feet and rattle off figures and budgetary arithmetic. That's all very well and good, but you see, the problem is that it's not responding to Maggie. It's not answering the needs of that family. And I appreciate people across the House have heard these stories, and I know the ministers have heard these stories too. And I can only imagine your frustration listening to that. Because if I was sitting where you're sitting, I would be frustrated at a government that is clearly failing, that clearly has very large resources at its disposal, but whose only response to a very reasonable and important piece of legislation to ensure that CAMHS is regulated appropriately is to kick the can down the road for 6 or 9 months. I asked you if you're supporting this important step forward. The answer to that clearly is no. You just didn't have the heart to answer me directly.
Minister.
So, Deputy, you're not getting away with that. In my answer, I responded back with 2 points. First of all, I acknowledge that we as a government feel every bit as much as you do the needs that are there, and we correspond that, though, with commitment to make a difference. So I'm not going to allow you to paint a familiar trope that you seek to paint on a regular basis of all the compassion in the House sitting over there. We are as aware as anyone else in this House is of the difference that needs to be made. And secondly, what I did is I outlined something you're clearly uncomfortable with. I outlined the detail of what the government is doing. I outlined the resources that are in place, the jobs that are in place, the reform measures that are in place to help Maggie and others. And of course we acknowledge our efforts are not reaching Maggie in the way we want them to.
And thousands
they
of
are reaching others, and what we are determined to do by the measures that I've outlined is help even more. And there's nothing rhetorical about the fact that since August of 2023, the waiting list for CAMHS has actually fallen. Hasn't fallen by as much as we would want, but it has fallen. There's nothing rhetorical in the fact that around 94% of all urgent cases that are raised with CAMHS are responded to within 72 hours. We know more needs to be done, but we are supplying the resources, we are supplying the roles, and we are corresponding that also with the reform measures to make a difference to help even more.
Deputy Holly Kearns, the Leader of the Social Democrats, please.
Minister, there is a lot of hurt and anger in the country at the moment. Many disabled people and their carers feel forgotten and abandoned by the government and indeed by the referendum. The proposed amendment only gives recognition to care within the family. The Social Democrats attempted to amend this wording to include care in the community to ensure the state has an explicit obligation to provide it. But the government rejected our amendment and guillotined the legislation. Despite this, the Social Democrats have opted to support both amendments because ultimately we've been left with a choice between leaving misogynistic language in the Constitution or replacing it with language that is an improvement but should have gone so much further. The new wording is better than the old, and unfortunately, that is all we have an opportunity to vote on. I know that there are people who disagree and are hurt by our decision, and I want to acknowledge that. And I want to tell those people that I'm listening. Because disabled people are rightly asking questions of the government and of the opposition. They want to know what their rights mean to us and how we intend to vindicate them. For years, the state has failed to do the very basics for 22% of the population. This state neglect is ruining people's lives. Is it any wonder that the proposed wording of the new amendment makes it feel like people's rights are being further disregarded? Because constitutional recognition means something. It means something for lone parents who will be recognised as families. It means something for carers whose work would finally be acknowledged, and it would mean something for disabled people to have their rights recognised too. But the government refused to do that. So what will you do to improve the rights of disabled people in Ireland? Because you don't need a referendum to do that. You could act today. You could ratify the optional protocol of the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. In 2018, the government ratified the convention, but for 6 years has refused to sign the part which means the government can be held to account for failing to allow people to exercise their rights. It is disgraceful. Is it any wonder people don't trust the government when it comes to disability rights? People have a right to more than platitudes and empty promises. Ratifying the optional protocol is something you could do now, and it could be transformative. Minister, last week the Taoiseach told me it is his intention to ratify the optional protocol within this government's lifetime. So you only have a maximum of 12 months to do that. Minister, when is the government going to ratify the optional protocol? We need you to name the date.
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Thank you very much. I do want to acknowledge the support that you and the Social Democrats are offering to referenda and to changes within our constitution that you acknowledge and we're making the case for too, will represent a very important improvement on the current wording within our constitution and will take an important step, we believe, towards having a constitution that is in line with the values and with the reality of modern Ireland. In relation to the specific question that you've put to me, in relation to the signing of the additional and optional protocol, the Taoiseach did indeed outline last week the commitment that he and in particular Minister O'Gorman has to the signing of this protocol during the term of this government. And that means now it's very important that we do continue with our efforts to get ready to sign this very important protocol, and one that we acknowledge will be very, very important to those with disabilities within our country and to their carers. In relation to where the process currently stands at the moment, we had originally planned to progress ratification of the original protocol after the conclusion of our first progress review within the existing convention. That wasn't possible, I understand, because the UN's own cycle of reviews were delayed post-COVID, and the government has already indicated, and I want to do so again here today, an openness to earlier ratification. Work is continuing to get us ready for that point. In August of last year, the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth commissioned external legal counsel to scope out the kind of legal reform and change that is needed to allow for Ireland signing up to the optional protocol and to look at what domestic remedies and processes need to be in place to allow those to vindicate their rights when this protocol is in place. I know that the Department of Children will receive the scoping report in relation to this very, very shortly. And then after that, Minister O'Gorman intends to bring a memorandum to government. And by memorandum, I mean a proposal regarding how we can move this forward, outlining the kind of changes that are needed and how we will look to secure all of this and make this change within the time frame that I've already outlined.
Minister, the simple fact of the matter is that it's within the government's power to address the issues faced by disabled people or people with disabilities. So you don't need a referendum to fully staff the Children's Disability Network teams. You don't need a referendum to provide more personal assistance hours. You don't need a referendum to replace the transport schemes that Fine Gael scrapped over a decade ago. And you don't need a referendum to ratify the optional protocol. And every year when we come in here for the budget, I go straight to the section of the budget on disability. And year after year, there's no meaningful attempt to address the disgraceful and shameful absence of the provision of the bare minimum of services for disabled people. And Minister, I'm sure you've heard that expression, show me your budget and I'll tell you my priorities. And it's very clear that disability services are not prioritised. And ratifying the optional protocol would be a clear signal of intention for a step change in the direction of this and successive governments in relation to disability services. So Ireland was the last country to ratify the convention, the last country in Europe. And 6 years after that, 4 years into this term of government, you're saying, we're going to do it in this term. You've 12 months left and you're talking about reports and all of these things. Minister, are we any closer to the answer to my original question? Can you name the date?
Thank you. Minister.
But I'm making very clear the commitment that the government has to do it inside its current mandate. We're making that very, very clear. And what I'm not going to do in response to what is a sensitive and important question is outline a date that the government, in the process of dealing with what will be a sensitive matter, finds out then that we can't deliver. We are committed to doing it. The Taoiseach, Minister O'Gorman, myself are emphasising the aim that we have to doing that. But as you say yourself, it's not just in a referendum, it's not just in changing in our constitution, it's not even just by the ratification of this protocol that we can show the values and show the commitment that we have to making a difference to supporting those with disabilities. And it is the reason why in Budget 2025, in that budget alone, there was a further €205 million made available to support those with disabilities, to support the services that we know need to be in place for them. It's the reason why, for example, disability and all the health services around it have now been moved into a new government department to give it the focus that it needs and deserves, and building on work that is already done. And it's the reason why now the government has an action plan to support those with disabilities, to ensure the additional funding that is being made available in this and other budgets translates into improved supports and improved services. So we are committed to doing that, and in addition to reaffirm what Minister O'Gorman and the Taoiseach has already said, that in the months ahead we are committed to moving ahead with this protocol.
Thank you very much. Now on behalf of the regional group, Deputy Matt Shanahan.
Michael Concorda. Minister John Deasy, Paddy Coffey, Pat Deering, Phil Hogan, Liam Toomey, Michael Darcy, Paul Keogh, John Paul Phelan. All Fine Gael TDs from the South East, all have either fallen or are on the precipice. Fine Gael remarkably won 50% of the 14 seats in the 2011 general election in the South East of Ireland. Once this Dáil is dissolved, all these people will have left national politics. It is an incredible reflection, actually an indictment of Fine Gael's decade in power, that these candidates were not returned or chose not to face the electorate. The South East is not remarkable, Minister. The North West and the Midlands are walking away also from the traditional parties of government. Basically, people are being forced to seek out new homes because of their political anger. You know the movie The Hunger Games, Minister, a possible characterisation of Boris Johnson's levelling up strategy. An insanely out-of-touch capital acts as a parasite on the rest of the country. Provinces are divided and conquered. But when you look at what is actually getting done in the National Development Plan, it is somewhat instructional. This year, we as a people will spend €13 billion on publicly funded capital projects. Indeed, it is projected at the end of this decade we will have spent €165 billion. The South East is 8.9% of the population, and in the past decade it has received less than 1% of all major capital spending. The region has turned away from Fine Gael because the educated view is that Fine Gael is not living up to its promises, Minister. According to the first iteration of your department's capital tracker, Dublin, with 29% of the population, is drinking in 65% of the spending on major projects. On your second iteration, it was 56%. For all the talk about spending codes and business plans, when big projects hit Cabinet, it is to Dublin and Cork that they go, and the rest of the country can wait. All this is before the absolutely ludicrous price tag of Metro North or the finalisation of the Children's Hospital Bill. Apparently, as a country, we could just have to close our eyes and cough up billions. In 2011, Fine Gael's promise to deliver a full national university to Waterford, similar to Maynooth or UL, was erased, with WIT left to starve for a decade and then forced into a complicated and underfunded merger. The new TU has no new courses, no new academic disciplines, no ability to borrow, no capital projects awarded. Minister, every single TU is now contracting against a growing university sector. What happened to Fine Gael's promises to the South East, Minister? Similarly, in 2013, you promised that being part of the Cork-led bio hospital grouping would not be to the disadvantage of University Hospital Waterford. That has resulted in that hospital getting less resources than every other Model 4 in the country. So, Minister, can you tell me what are Fine Gael's new messages to the people of Waterford and the South East, and why should anyone believe them?
Thank you, Deputy Shanahan. Minister.
Given your great interest in Fine Gael representation, Deputy, I'm very pleased to tell you that come the next election, every confidence that at least I have that Senator John Cummins will get elected to the Dáil. You appear to be so much focused on the past. We're focused on the needs of today, and we're confident about the story we'll be putting forward, and we'll be confident about the ability of somebody like Senator Cummins to make it, while other government representations will be doing the same. Maybe when you stand up again, you can explain the whole Hunger Games analogy all over to me. You appear to be painting some kind of vision of some kind of aggression, some kind of competition for life in the way you've described it. I don't get it. You might explain it a little bit more to us. And while you're busy, painting these kind of stories and trying to explain the story you've just put to me, let me tell you the kind of case that I'll be making, Senator Cummins will be making, and other public representatives from the government parties will be making to the people of the South East and beyond. So I didn't hear anywhere in your answer, in your question to me, the fact that in the companies that are supported by the IDA, the number of jobs in those companies has increased by 25%. No reference to that. They're improved jobs, better jobs, more jobs, making a difference to the people of South East and beyond. Didn't hear anywhere in the points that you were putting to me the progress that has been made in the North Quays. This is a project that has been enabled by government, that has the ability to transform the city of Waterford and beyond. Didn't hear, again, in your question to me, the acknowledgement of the difference the National Broadband Plan is making to towns and villages outside of our cities. The role that it is playing now in allowing jobs to be moved out of our large cities and to counties and to towns where those can do their work nearer to home. This is something that is benefiting everybody. And of course, in the Technological University of the South East, it is and remains the case that the government is fully committed to how that can be developed in the time ahead and how we can ensure that the young women and men that you're referring to have the education, have the university and higher education services and supports that they need closer to home. That is the reality of how we are looking to make a difference to the communities that you refer to. And if I look at the point that you're making about our hospital services and where they stand in the South East, of course we're aware of how much more needs to be done. Of course we're aware of the pressures that our health services are facing. But it still remains the case that for the hospital, for the people who are working in it, there's more staff working there with a bigger budget, due to the changes that are being made by the government to expand the health budget and to bring more nurses and more doctors in to the hospitals that can make a difference to the health of the people of the South East and of our country overall. That's the story of the difference that we are making. That's the proposition that we will be bringing. And it's a proposition that I'm sure Senator John Cummins, given your fixation in Fine Gael, will be communicating with great vigour and gusto in the time ahead.
Deputy Shanahan.
Thank you, Count Corley. Well, Minister, you obviously didn't listen to me if you said I didn't listen to you. I would say to you that the commitment to the South East TU, if you want to talk about commitment, you might put on the Dáil record now, is government prepared to endorse the €350 million project plan as put out by the President of SETU? That would be something like a game changer. Are you prepared to announce the development of the engineering building, first promised in 2009, still sitting in a PPP, which has still not been approved, Minister? Maybe you might approve that. Or perhaps you'd like to go down to the hospital and explain why the hospital was cut out of €650 million capital funding last year, given to the other 8 Model 4s, or why in a decade that hospital received just 1/3 of all the capital funding given to each of the other 8 Model 4s. And you can shake your head, Minister, and think you've heard it all before, but you haven't heard it all before. And I can promise you, your constituent colleague, when he stands on the door, will be hearing it, because people in Waterford and the South East, Minister, are growing tired. And I might point out to you that still, after all the talk in this House of trying to improve cardiac services in the country, we still do not even have a 7-day emergency heart attack service in University Hospital Waterford, the only region in the country without it. That's what it looks like to me now, to be frank, Minister. I didn't hear anything in your response to change that view.
Actually, I responded back to all the different points that you made. Every point that you put to me regarding investment in different parts of the South East, I responded back to. I outlined what the government is doing. I responded back to your question. I laid out what we're doing and said, and Deputy, can I remind you, it doesn't stop you from turning up to all the different announcements that are announced by government. You're there.
Yeah,
you're eager enough to get into the photo.
Minister, I have to be there to make sure they are announced.
You're eager enough to take the credit for all the progress the government is making, while of course we know we need to do more as well. With regard to University Hospital Waterford, as it stands at the moment, in 2019 the budget stood at €201 million. It increased to €268 million, an increase of a third in 4 years, meaning now that there are 2,758 people working in University Hospital Galway, an increase of 809 since December 2019. And I have little doubt at all that when all of these different measures were being announced, you were there, standing beside the government representative, looking to take credit for it as well.
Minister, I'm not taking credit. With respect, Minister, I'm not taking credit. I pointed out to you, it's the least funded and it remains the least funded.
I answered Deputy Shanahan. I answered him. He was too busy with his Hungry Games. I'm outlining the difference that has been made and what has happened. It's also the case that other measures the government were committed to has happened. St Declan's Way, the development of Cappoquin, the work that has happened now at Mount Congreve are only just a few of the commitment the government has to make a difference.
Walkways, ministers, not roads.
Like we have a commitment to make a difference to every other part of the country.
Thank you very much. Now, I have the name of Deputy Michael McNamara for the independent group, but I take it Deputy Pringle.
Sorry, Concordia. Thanks for that. Minister, it has been nearly a year since the publication of the damning report into St John's Ambulance, which included findings such as the organisation's structure and culture left the organisation vulnerable to grooming and sexual abuse of children within the organisational context. The hierarchical structure facilitated predator behaviour within the organisation in the past, and there was a significant degree of organisational awareness of serious threats to children, with the organisation failing to undertake any meaningful investigation into known and suspected threats to children prior to 2000. These are just some of the many shocking findings in the 333-page report. Unfortunately for survivors, this report was far from shocking, and I would like to take this time to commend survivors for their tireless work and bravery. The fact that they were forced to experience such abuse as children is horrific, but the way they were treated by St John Ambulance following this is truly appalling. The organisation completely failed survivors by first failing to protect them and then by turning a blind eye, in some cases even accusing survivors of lying. And they have only continued to fail them since. The lengthy process that survivors had to go through to ensure that this report was completed was unacceptable. Not only that, but once completed, they had to fight to actually get it published. It was only published after daily protests outside the headquarters of the St John Ambulance. This was a disgraceful way to treat abuse survivors, and the lack of respect and care shown by the St John Ambulance should be noted. It is clear that this is not a case of failures by the organisation 20 years ago. This is a case of consistent and repeated failures by the organisation as recently as last year. Minister, as you know, the report made a series of recommendations, one of which was the employment of a full-time safeguarding officer, independent of St John's Ambulance. However, over years after the organisation were given these recommendations, this has yet to be implemented, with the organisation now saying that it doesn't have the funding to employ a safeguarding officer. The fact that this hasn't been a priority for the organisation is extremely disappointing. Nothing should be more important to St John's Ambulance than ensuring sufficient child protection, especially in light of the many failures spanning decades. I know that Minister O'Gorman said last week that the government will make a contribution for the first year towards the cost of the safeguarding officer, and link that to an agreement with the organisation in terms of a service level agreement. But my question is, Minister, can you justify and outline the rationale for the payment of the role of a safeguarding officer in St John Ambulance, and explain if this will be a mechanism available to other organisations in financial distress as well?
Okay, so thank you, Deputy, for raising what I know is an extremely important matter. We are all aware of the need to respect the voice of survivors, to respond back to the suffering and abuse that many have endured. And I know you've been raising this issue for some time, and I know that Minister O'Gorman is very much aware of the importance of this issue, and in his department is working to make a difference to it. In relation to the particular point that you've put to me regarding the role of a child protection officer, the reason why that role will be provided and indeed funded by the Minister O'Gorman's department is because we believe it is a very important element in how we can secure the continued safety of those who are working in that organisation or they may indeed be using its services. This will in particular play a very important role in helping safeguard the safety of young people within the organisation. Minister O'Gorman and the government believe it's an intervention that we have to make and have to make quickly, and it will also put in place then an accountability relationship between the department and St John's Ambulance through a service level agreement to be confident that this role and this office is being used in the way we want. So to respond back to your question directly, it's because we believe it's the kind of change that is needed to help the government, to help those who are involved in running St John's Ambulance, to respond back to the need to better protect and ensure the safety of young people in the organisation.
Deputy Pringle.
I think it's completely unacceptable that St John's Ambulance sat on these recommendations for a year, knowing that they didn't have the cash and ultimately putting more children within the organisation at risk. As well as this, the board of the organisation has largely remained the same, with the exception of someone who joined just before Christmas. It seems to me that St John Ambulance are not taking the recommendations of this extremely damning report into their organisation seriously enough. It is a major slap in the face for survivors of abuse that the organisation is now receiving €100,000 from the government after sitting on their hands for over a year, while survivors received nothing but a few numbers to call if they were feeling suicidal. Why has the organisation been allowed to repeatedly disrespect victims and fail to ensure adequate protection for the young people who continue to work in St John's Ambulance? And also, as Minister, what about the victims and the survivors of the abuse? Who has a responsibility towards them? And should the department not be in contact with them as well, letting them know what's happening?
Thank you very much, Deputy. Minister O'Gorman has indicated his concern regarding the delay, regarding the appointment of that person into that role. He and the government believes it's a very important intervention that is needed to respond back to the issues of public concern that you're referring to. The Shannon report itself into the issues that you've referred to is one that was driven, highly supported by Minister O'Gorman after he met survivors and had the kind of issues that you're referring to raised with him. I understand that Minister O'Gorman has met with the survivors as recently as 10 days ago to hear their views, to hear their voice on this deeply, deeply important issue. And it is why he's committed and we're committed to putting in place this role, putting in place a service level agreement to ensure that the critical issues that we have learned so much about in our country in recent years, that those kind of risks are not in front of us and that this office and this role can make a difference to us. So Minister O'Gorman, his officials are in contact with the survivors and with stakeholders in this issue and will engage in this matter really regularly to get this role in place and to try to safeguard against the risks that you're referring to.
Thank you very much, Minister. That concludes Idris' questions. And we move.
Resignation of Siún Ní Raghallaigh.